How's it going, everybody, and welcome to CodeCamp 2020. In this video, I'm going to help you guys get started by setting up your rookie kits. To get started, we're going to go to repl.it/codechangers/io-template. Once we make it there, we want to click the fork button up at the top of the page, which should pull up a prompt that asks you to either log in or get signed up. Since I don't have an account yet, I'm going to go ahead and sign up by entering a username, an email, and a password. Then we'll click the sign up button, and it should get our REPL set up for us. The first thing I'm going to do with my REPL is come up here to the top, click the drop down box, and change the name of it from IO template to Mikailer's IO game. And then I'm going to change the description from the default to say, this is my project for CodeCamp 2020. Once I get all of that set up, I'm going to click back into the REPL here, and it's going to do a little bit of reloading. But now we're all set up to get started looking at some of the stuff that we're going to be doing with the rookie kit. So this year, the rookie kit is building your own online multiplayer IO game, so that way you can kind of make your own custom game and you can play online with your friends. This README that pops up when you first load the REPL has a couple descriptions of some different things, and it has an example soccer and ninja game to kind of give you an idea of what you might be able to build. Below that, it has some different steps for figuring out how to get your game running, and let's go ahead and try that out now. The first step is to click these triple dots right next to the Add File and Add Folder button, and that's going to pull up this drop down where we're going to click Download as Zip. That's going to download a zip file for us where we get our code in a compressed format. Then we're going to open up a new tab and go to blobbert.io. And on this site, we're going to click the Don't Have an Account Sign Up button. And then I'm going to type in my email and a password. Once we get signed in, we get taken to the Blobbert.io dashboard where it tells us that we don't have any games set up yet. So we'll go ahead and click the new button in the top right corner, and we're going to type our game name in. So I'll say Mikailer's game. Then we get to set a type, and we're just going to click default template because we're building our own game. And then we can just drag our zip file up into the code file slot and click submit. Then it's going to tell us that our game is created, and it'll have it all set up for us. But if we click play, it just gives us a completely blank game because there's nothing in it yet. So what we want to do is go back into our code and kind of build out the basics of what you're going to be doing for the entirety of the CodeCamp rookie kit, just to get a very basic multiplayer game running. So to get started, we're going to drag this off to the side so we have some more space. Then we're going to open this code folder in our files, and we'll see that there's two more folders, the client folder and the server folder. And the way that this IO game works is we have to have a server so that way we can play online with our friends. So we have to write a little bit of server code along with some code for our actual game where we're displaying the images and doing all of that cool stuff. So we'll get started by clicking into our server folder and then clicking on the rooms folder, and we want to click this room.js file. That's going to go ahead and open up some template code for you that's pretty much blank for the most part. Before we get started adding anything, I'm going to go through and describe what each of these different things do so you have a better understanding of what to do while you're making your games. On this line 6, there's this on init section, and this is the code that's going to run right when your server gets started and before anyone joins the game. So this is good for kind of setting up your different characters and setting up different rules for the game that you need to be set up right as soon as the server gets started. The next section down here is on join. This section runs every time a new person joins your game, so that way you can kind of add a new character in or set up the lobby so that way when people are joining and leaving, you can be able to have all of the games update and make it live updates. Then this next section is the on message section, and this is what happens when the website sends back some data to the server so that way they can talk to each other and communicate different messages, so that way the people that are playing the game are able to interact with the server. Then the next section down here is on update, and this is just a loop that runs constantly, and it's good for checking different game logic like collisions or different updates that might need to happen continuously. Then the last section is this on leave section, and this runs as soon as somebody leaves the game. So this is good for kind of cleaning up or removing somebody from the game after they've left the page. Now that we've looked over some of the server stuff, let's open our client folder and open our SRC folder and click game.js. Inside of game.js, we can see we have a couple of similar sections inside of here. The init section does the same thing, except this runs as soon as somebody joins the game instead of as soon as the server starts. Then the next section is preload. This is used for setting up different assets like your images, maybe some videos, and maybe some audio if you needed to put that in there. And then the next section down here is create. This runs right after you've joined the game, and this is where you kind of set up the environment. It's where you're going to draw your background and get the characters into the game and all that cool stuff. Then we have an update section, and this is very similar to the on update section that's on the server, and it just runs a continuous loop where you can check different things like, are they pressing any keys on the keyboard, and different things like that. Then our last section down at the bottom is click, and this section is used to tell when a player clicks on the game, which can be handy for doing different things like having user input where they want to place certain items down wherever their mouse is clicking. Now that we've got a brief overview of all of that, let's get started by adding some very basic functionality to the game. We'll click on line 13 in our game.js file and hit the tab key so we go inside the init function. And inside here, the first thing we want to do is just set up the library for the game. So we're going to do that by saying g.setup, and then we want to say this. And what this does is it links our IO game library, which gives you a whole bunch of functionality, to your game so that way they can interact with each other seamlessly. Now that we've got the setup done, we'll hit enter, and we want to add a character to the game. So we'll say g.add characters, and then we want some parentheses, and then we want some single quotes inside of here, and we need to tell what type of characters we want to create. So in our case, we just want to create some players. Then we want to go to the end of the line and put a semicolon, and that's going to set up our characters for us. Now the next thing we need to do is load an image in for the players. Luckily, the template comes with this phaser logo for us, so we can just show that instead of having to go find our own. But for your game, it's highly encouraged that you either make your own images or find them on Google Images. We'll click down on line 18 inside of the preload, hit tab, and we're going to say g.loadImage, and then we need some parentheses, and we're going to put single quotes. And the cool part about the library is this add characters knows that you're going to need an image for the character, so it automatically tries to grab an image that you load called players. So to add the image to our character, all we have to do is name this loaded image players, and then we have to tell it what image we want to load. So we'll put a comma, some single quotes, and we're just going to say logo.png. Then we'll put a semicolon at the end of that line. Next, we'll go inside of our create function on line 22, press tab, and we need to connect to the server to make sure that we're getting updates when other people join our game. And to do that, all we have to do is say g.getCharacters, and then some parentheses. Then we need some single quotes, and we need to say what type of characters we want to get. So we'll say players. Then we'll go to the end of the line and put a semicolon there. And we don't need anything inside of our update or click yet because we're not adding some crazy game functionality, but we just want to get a player to show up. And that's all we need to get started with our game.js file. So we'll go ahead and click back inside of room.js, click on line 7, press tab, and we have to do the same thing here where we set up the library. So we'll say g.setup parentheses this, then we need a semicolon, then we'll hit enter, and we need to actually set up the server side for our characters. So we'll say g.setup characters, then some parentheses, some single quotes, and we're going to say players, just like we said for our game.js file. Then we'll put a semicolon, and we're going to click inside of our onJoin function and press tab. And inside here, this is what's going to happen when somebody actually joins the game. So we'll click on line 12, and we're going to say g.create a character. Once we type that out, we'll put some parentheses, some single quotes, and we need to tell it what type of character we want to create. So we'll say players. Then we need to put a comma, and we need to give it an ID. So we want to link it to the client or the person who's using the game. So we'll say client.session ID. Then we'll put a comma and a space, and we need to put some curly braces here. And inside the curly braces, we need to give the player a position. So we'll say x colon and say 200. Then we'll put a comma, a space, and say y colon 200. And then we can put a semicolon at the end of the line. So what's going to happen in here is when we create a new character, which is happening when somebody joins our game, we're going to give it their website's ID, and we're going to create their character at the X position of 200 and at the Y position of 200. The next thing that we need to do is go back into our game.js, and inside of create, we're going to click right at the end of line 21, hit enter, and the last step before we can get something to show up is we just want to say g.connect parentheses, and then we can put a semicolon at the end of the line. And this g.connect just joins the server, so that's going to trigger our onJoin function. And that's what makes it so that way when you go to the server or when you go to the game, it immediately makes you join, and then you can start playing. So we'll go ahead and click our triple dots right here, download a zip, and we'll see that we get a new zip file down here. Then we'll go back to our blobbert.io tab, click the pencil icon which says edit, and we want to drag our new zip file up there and drop it, and it should have some type of indicator that it's a new zip. And once that's done, we'll click submit, click the check mark, and then if we click play again, it'll take us back to our game. But it's important to remember that on the server side of this, once you upload, it does take a little bit of time for the server to create your game. So every time you upload some new code, it's going to make your old game stop running, and it's going to build the code, and within a couple minutes, it should have your new game live to where you can play it. Once your game loads, you should see the Phaser logo in the top left-hand corner. So if you got that much working, that means that our website is able to connect to the server, create a character, and then have that character show up inside of our game. The next thing that we're going to do in this tutorial is make it so that way we can move our character around. So let's click back into our REPL, scroll all the way to the top, click at the end of line 5, hit enter, and we're going to create a variable up here called keys. So we'll say const space keys. Then we're going to say space equals space, and we want some curly braces and a semicolon. Then we'll go in between the curly braces, hit enter, and all we have to do inside here is define all the keys that we want to use in our game. So the first one we'll do is W, then we need a colon, and we're going to set W to keycodes.w capitalized. Then we need a comma, hit enter, then we'll do A, colon, and we'll set that to keycodes.A. Then we want another comma, hit enter. Then we'll do S, colon, space, keycodes dot capital S, comma, enter, D, colon, space, keycodes dot capital D. Now that's going to be enough for us to get moving up, down, left, and right, but if you like using the arrow keys more than WASD, we can add those in too. So we'll put a comma, say up, colon, space, keycodes dot up with a capital U and P. Then we'll put a comma, enter, say right, colon, space, keycodes dot all caps right, then a comma, enter, down, colon, space, keycodes dot all caps down, then a comma, then we'll hit enter, and our last one will be left, colon, space, keycodes dot all caps left. Once we get our keys added, we're just going to scroll down to our create function and click on line 32 right after we say g.connect. We'll hit enter and say g.setup keys, and then we need some parentheses, and we're just going to say keys and a semicolon. So this is going to take the keys that we defined up here and pass them into our game so it keeps track of whether the player is pressing the keys or not. Then we'll come down to line 38 inside of our update, and we're going to put an if statement here. So we'll say if space parentheses g.can send, and then we need some more parentheses. Then we'll go to the end of the line and put some curly braces, hit enter. Then we're going to say const space curly braces, and then we're going to say w, comma, space a, comma s, comma d, comma up, comma down, comma left, comma right. Then we'll say space equals space, and we're going to say g.get keys down, and then we need some parentheses. After that, we'll go ahead and hit enter and say if space parentheses, then we'll say w space value bar space, and then we're going to say up. And these two value bars are the same thing as saying or, so we're saying if they're pressing the W key or the up arrow, then we'll put a space and say g.send action parentheses single quotes, and we're going to say move up. Then we'll put a semicolon at the end of the line. Then we'll go ahead and hit enter, and we're going to say if space parentheses a space value bar space left. So if they're pressing the A key or the left arrow key, then we'll go outside of the parentheses and say g.send action parentheses single quotes, and we're going to say move left. Then we'll put a semicolon at the end of that line. Then we're just going to do the same thing for down and right. So we'll hit enter and say if space parentheses, and then we're going to say s space value bar space down. Then we'll go outside the parentheses and say g.send action. Then we want some parentheses there, some single quotes, and we're going to say move down. Then we'll put semicolon at the end of that line, hit enter, and say if space parentheses. Then we're going to say D, and we'll say space value bar space, and then this one's going to go with right. So if they're pressing the D key or the right arrow key. Then we'll go outside the parentheses, put a space, say g.send action parentheses single quotes, and this last one is move right. Then we'll put a semicolon there. So what this update method is going to do is it's going to run continuously throughout the game, and the first thing it's going to check is if we're allowed to send messages to the server yet or not. So we're only allowed to send messages to the server after the connection has completed. So once that's completed, this will be set to true, and we'll run all of the code inside of the if statement. What we're doing here is grabbing all of our different keys from the keys down, and it's going to tell us whether or not that key is being pressed. So if W is pressed or the up arrow key is pressed, then we want to send an action, which is just like a message, over to the server, and the message we want to send is move up. So now let's go into our room.js file and actually deal with those messages so that way we can figure out how to get the players to move around. Let's click on line 16 and press tab. And the first thing we want to do inside of here is get our player. So we'll say const space player space equals space. And then we're going to say g.get a character. Then we need parentheses, some single quotes, and the type of player is players. And then we're going to put a comma and a space. And the specific character that we want is client.session ID, which is just the ID of the website that's connecting to our server. Then we'll put a semicolon there, hit enter. Then we're going to set our speed. So we'll say const space speed space equals space 5, and then we'll put a semicolon there. Now you can change this speed to be whatever you want. If you want it to be faster, you'll make it a bigger number like 10, or if you want it to be slower, you'll make it a smaller number like 2. Once we get the speed set, we'll hit enter. And on this line, we're going to handle all of our actions. So we'll say const space actions space equals space. Then we need some curly braces and a semicolon. Then we'll go inside the curly braces, hit enter, and we're just going to say our first action, which is move up. Then we need a colon, a space, some parentheses, a space, an equal sign, a greater than symbol, and then another space. And right here, all we want to do is just move our character up. So we'll say g.move, then we'll put some parentheses, and the character that we want to move is our player. Then we'll put a comma and a space and some single quotes. And the position that we want to move on the player is the Y position because that goes up and down. Then we'll put a comma, a space, and we want to move the Y by negative speed because going negative along the Y-axis makes us move up and going positive makes us go down. After we finish with that one, we'll put a comma at the end, hit enter, and now we just need to do the rest of them. So we'll say move left, then we'll put colon, space, parentheses, space, equals, greater than, space, g.move, parentheses, player, comma, space, single quotes. And then since we're going left, we want to do an X this time. Then we'll put a comma outside the single quote and say minus speed again because negative along the X makes us go left and positive along the X makes us go right. Then we'll go to the end of the line, put a comma, hit enter, say move right. Then we want a colon, space, parentheses, space, equals, greater than, space, g.move, parentheses, player, comma, space, single quotes, X. Then we'll go outside the single quotes, put a comma, space, and this time we're just going to say speed because we want to go to the right, so we want our speed to be positive. Then we'll put a comma at the end of the line, hit enter, and we're going to do our last action here, which is move down. Then we'll put a colon, space, parentheses, space, equals, greater than, space, g.move, parentheses, player, comma, space, single quotes, Y, go outside the single quote, put a comma, space, and just say positive speed again. The last thing we have to do is take these actions and handle them. So we'll click on line 23, hit enter, and then we're going to say g.handle actions, parentheses, and we're going to say actions, comma, space, data. And then we're going to put a single quote there. And that's all there is to it to get it moving. So we'll go ahead and click our triple dots, click download as zip. We'll click back into our Blobber.io, click the pencil icon to edit, drag our new zip up, click submit, click OK, and then we'll go back to our game and refresh and wait for the new version to load. Once the new version of our game loads, we should see the Phaser logo when we first join, and then we should be able to use WASD to move around and also use the arrow keys to get our character to move around. And that's really all there is to it. You can kind of repeat that same pattern, put your own images in, make some different characters, but that basic flow of create the character and then send the actions over is really all you need to do to make some really awesome games.